Hey you, welcome back to the channel. And today we want to talk about the Electoral College and candidate Elizabeth Warren. So, what's been coming up quite a bit during this campaign is eliminating the Electoral College. It's no mistake that we have Elizabeth Warren as part of this video because Elizabeth Warren is one of those candidates that are championing the abolishment of the Electoral College. So, what we want to do is try to talk about some of the importance of the Electoral College, um, some of the things that don't make it feel as much a part of the democratic process as maybe we like, and Andrew Yang's view on the Electoral College. So, as is here on his website, and he talks about the importance of the Electoral College as an important system that ensures the will of the larger, more populous areas of the country aren't the only focus of nationwide elections. It also it's also enshrined in the Constitution. So, without the Constitution, uh, it would be hard for the nation to find its bearings. And so the Constitution is the pillar to where we have to use as the stabilizer into how we make our policies going forward. Without the Constitution, we would have no place to pull from, right? And so the values and views of our nation could be shifted into areas that wouldn't be part of the fibers and roots of what America is supposed to be about. But now it would seem that how it's coming off that whether Andrew Yang wants to is interested in at some point abolishing the Electoral College or letting it remain, or making changes and amendments to it to make it better. What it does seem clear is abolishing the Electoral College at this point is definitely not on Andrew Yang's radar. And it goes on to talk about how he doesn't feel that ultimately we will be able to abolish the Electoral College anytime in the near future. He states that said the Electoral College is likely here to stay for the foreseeable future. So, from Andrew Yang's perspective, it's probably not a big reason to focus on the Electoral College right now. And So this has been a kind of create a kind of division in ideas about should we keep the Electoral College or should we just get rid of it, right? Um, so the thing is, after listening carefully to both sides of the argument about the Electoral College, uh, I'm starting to more so agree with Andrew Yang about the Electoral College. Now, in the beginning, I kind of felt like, well, the Electoral College at least let the American people fully control that part of the democracy, right? Let the American people select the president, and then we act more in the republic capacity, right? Because we're a republic, not a democracy. We act more in a whereas once we've chosen the candidate, he now has the power to make the decision on our behalf. And so I thought that was a fair trade-off. But what we're also certainly realizing, or one of the big issues with the Electoral College, is what happens when the more populous states and areas of the country start to control these elections, and the candidates themselves just show up like they wouldn't have to campaign in the smaller states. They show up in California, New York, right? In the smaller states like Delaware, they wouldn't. It would be like no reason to show up there, right? If you're just going for the popular vote. Um, in addition to that, you would also have the problem of if you kind of look at the country, the United States, you know, the 50 separate states that are united, right? So these are the state's governance has its own policies and ideas and cultural, if you will, views about things. If you're in the southern United States, they may have a different way of looking at things than in the northern United States. And in the Pacific Western United States, they might have a different cultural view on things. Now, this is if we were to kind of compare the United States to, let's say, Europe or nations around the world, you will find that within the European Union and ideas like that, all these separate countries, whereas they're all part of the European Union, they still have their own views and ideas about things, right? So what you might get in one nation in Europe, what you might get over in France is something different than you might get over in Germany, right? And I think the United States kind of works in a similar way. So if you went for the popular vote only, and we went to a place like California, a Californian might look at the country somewhat a bit different than a Floridian or Georgian or Texan or something like that, right? So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that, you know, the having the popular vote win out the election in a weird way can kind of feel a little bit less democratic, right? Because certain areas of the United States would then control the elections, right? And their viewpoints about how things are done in those particular regions of the country will control where the entire nation goes, right? That makes sense. Now here's the kind of drawback to all of this. And whereas I agree with Andrew Yang on the idea that the Electoral College, in that sense, maybe needs to stay intact. Where this can, I think, hurt Andrew Yang as well is that whereas they're representative wise, or the there is kind of, we can kind of fall in that pitfall of where there is only representation in certain regions of the country, right? And now it's kind of pushed forward and controlling those elections. But I think the where this can hurt Andrew Yang is that the one idea that is universal about Andrew Yang's policies is the freedom dividend, the UBI, right? And so think about this, look at it this way. With a message so universal, even if you have a high level of representation coming from areas like California, where maybe people, in a weird way, kind of pretty much think the same thing about things, and those views aren't well represented as what are the values of the nation. You would still have in something like the freedom dividend a universal appeal to it, right? People who need the freedom dividend, who are people who are living below the poverty line, or just having difficulties making ends meet each month, despite what area of the world these people live in, they would choose the freedom dividend, right? Eliminating the popular vote, I think, would probably be more damaging to Andrew Yang's campaign more so than it would be to the United States of America, the country. So, in a way, I look at it like Andrew Yang's being a good presidential candidate, being very patriotic. But on the flip side, the reverse side, I look at it like this could fundamentally hurt his campaign, right? His run for the president. Now, to contrast that with Elizabeth Warren, she wants to get rid of the Electoral College. Now, we talked a little bit in the last video about some of the issues with many of the Democratic candidates that are leading in the polls. We look at somebody like Joe Biden. Joe Biden, has been plagued with controversies from racism to sexual misconduct, right? Uh, and even to the point of where he was uh, at meetings telling rich people, right, at campaign fundraisers, telling rich people that, hey, nothing's going to really change dramatically for you, which is not a really good message that the Democratic camp wants to hear, right? They don't want to hear that things are going to continue to be very good for the rich people and not everybody else. And so these things are like chains around with a stone tied to it around Biden's neck. Now we move on to someone like Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders, I think, is basically in a situation where a lot of people don't feel he represents the entire United States of America, right? He is seen as an enemy to entrepreneurs and business people. And so, whereas I respect Bernie Sanders a great deal, and I see him as a person who wants equality and justice and all those very things that we as Americans hold true to value, I also see him as a problem when it comes to the Constitution. When we go into the areas of the Constitution that talk about their right to liberty and the pursuit of happiness, right? It becomes a problem in that interpretation to say how far does the nation go with that. And when you look at somebody like Bernie Sanders, it goes all the way. And it doesn't create a whole lot of balance, I think, where he'll be able to speak to America as a whole. So with somebody like Bernie Sanders, you're either all the way with Bernie or you're not. I don't think it's going to be a whole lot of middle ground with Bernie, and I think that makes it difficult for Bernie to defeat Trump. Right, in the end, it's going to make him, because these are going to be two figures going head to head that are very polarizing. Right. Now, of course, Pete Buttigieg, who at one time I looked to me to create or seemed to be one of the most dangerous out there candidates to Andrew Yang, has been hit with a lot of problems from in South Bend, right? And South Bend, besides his very limited policies as far as information, he doesn't give a lot of information about his policies. Just to give you an example, he was on the Breakfast Club, the national syndicated radio show that pretty much is geared toward the African American voter, and a variety of things. Whereas he quickly spoke up, he was for reparations. His reparations plan, like many of his policy plans, aren't very specific at all. And so you don't really know exactly what you're getting with Pete Buttigieg. But with the South Bend incident, a variety of things, it's causing to lose a lot of that thunder, and it's not looking like Pete's gonna end up being the Democratic candidate. So don't really see him as a threat. Kamala Harris, very similar thing. She kind of hits on with the confrontational bit, how she'll deal with Trump. Uh, she won't let Trump handle her. That seems clear. But the problem with her goes back to policy with health care, right? She seems to be flip flopping on that, and a lot of the Democratic Party's not going to like that. But the real danger is somebody like Elizabeth Warren, who is this type of version of Bernie Sanders. She's like a scale. She's like the Bernie Sanders if you take the edges off ideas like socialism and you make it digestible. So she's dangerous in that way. She's also very dangerous in where it comes to policy, right? Because Elizabeth Warren, unlike the many other candidates who have these very skeleton, limited information like policies, she has carefully specific laid out plans to the point she can speak on them with specifics, and you know how they begin and how they end. So that makes her very dangerous. And she wants to eliminate the Electoral College because I believe Elizabeth sees that the Electoral College, much like what happened with Hillary Clinton, can be a negative to her campaign. It can actually stop her from winning. Somebody like Elizabeth Warren's probably going to need the popular, probably going to need, want to win by the popular vote, because that's probably where she's going to decisively get most of her votes. And so somebody like her is going to be dangerous to Andrew Yang, and wanting to abolish the Electoral College is going to help some people in that camp who still have trouble understanding the Electoral College as a true democratic model. We also have to take into account the Electoral College, although some people don't like it, and you know, I wanted there to be one thing that Americans fully control, that we could latch on to as democracy, and that was our voting system. And the Electoral College somewhat dilutes that, right, with how it's done. But when we look at ideas like mob rule, we see the many dangers of mob rule, right? We see the dangers of Nazi Germany. We see the dangers of the pre-civil rights era in the United States, where mob rule doesn't mean you make good decisions necessarily. I guess I can also liken it to if we were to think about engineers, right, who build bridges, right? If we had to vote on the decision what to do about the infrastructure of the United States, bridges and roads and things like that, how they should be built, by whom, and what have you, we wouldn't be able to do that because we're not engineers, right? We're not engineers. We're not, some of us aren't political scientists or doctors or anything like that. And what it does is it makes us, in a sense, unqualified to make decisions on an important scale like that. So we have to basically elect people, find people, commission people to take on those responsibilities, because we don't have the skill set to deal with that, right? And so I kind of look at the Electoral College in a way like that now, that if we rely on mob rule and the popular vote and everybody having access to votes, you know, there is a concern that the predominant areas of the country, groups of people, will dominate those votes, and that is a problem, on many levels. And so I can understand Andrew Yang's position on it. Now, of course, he wants to do some reform to it, and I'm sure that reform will probably make it better. But I can only say that for the country overall, the Electoral College makes sense, in my opinion. I've went with that idea now. But, and here's the big but for all the Andrew Yang supporters. The big but is that I believe that Andrew Yang not pushing to abolish the Electoral College, if his votes depended on the Electoral College, or the Electoral College, right? I think he would have it would greatly impair his campaign. I think with somebody like Andrew Yang with a universal idea like he's doing, the popular vote makes a lot more sense to his campaign. But that's kind of my views, and I love to hear you guys' ideas about it. Do you think mob rule is the answer? Right? Some people say the popular vote is more democratic, but some people have come to the conclusion that democracies don't work. When we try to see true democracies in action, they haven't always worked well. My concern is, how do you make decisions in a democracy that affect the entire country if we're not qualified to make them, right? It means we're still going to have to find somebody to make them who understands, who knows those things, who specializes in those things, right? But would love to hear you all's opinion. Don't forget our project, BitcoinMYK.com. It's like Bitcoin that supplies universal basic income to the globe. So as Yang supporters, that's something great for you to get involved in. If you're not in the United States and you're a supporter of the Yang family here, the BitcoinMYK.com project is a good project for you as well, because it would allow you to collect a form of universal basic income without being an American citizen. So that's something you definitely want to take advantage of. But that's all I want to say in this video. If you like content like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and until next time, take care.